He fell asleep on the couch. I didn't sleep at all. Because all night, I was weighing the space between what didn't happen and what almost did. My name is Claire. I'm 47. If someone asked me to describe my life, I think I'd say manageable. Not beautiful. Not tragic. Just manageable. Like a spreadsheet. Or a well-labeled shelf. I live in a house that's always just clean enough. My fridge is full, but uninspired. My marriage is quiet, but not strained. Michael and I have been married 16 years. I remember when he used to make coffee for me in the mornings, a little cinnamon sprinkled on top, just because. Now, if there's coffee, it's the preset timer. Black. No note. No smell strong enough to reach the hallway. We don't fight. We don't flirt. We coordinate. He leaves his shoes by the door. I put them on the mat without thinking. He reminds me when it's time for the car service. I set the dentist appointments. We're efficient. Symmetrical. We love like people who once were. Last Friday, Michael left for the airport with a carry-on bag and a sigh he tried to make sound neutral. 3 days, he said. I'll be back Sunday night. He was visiting his sister in Arizona. She just had a minor procedure, and her daughters were busy. He offered. I said, of course. It made sense. Most things in our life do. He kissed my cheek. The kind of kiss that barely touches skin. I'll text you from the gate, he said. I nodded, smiled, and then the door closed, and the sound of his footsteps faded down the walk. I stood in the hallway for a long time after that. Not because I was sad. Just unready to move. The house felt too quiet. Not empty. Just unoccupied. As if it no longer recognized me standing inside it. It was 8:17 when the doorbell rang. I was still in the kitchen, eating leftover soup out of the container with a spoon. The overhead light was too bright. I hadn't turned on music. I hadn't changed clothes. I wasn't expecting anyone. The sound startled me. I opened the door without checking the peephole. And there he was. Josh. He looked older than I remembered, but not old. Worn in the way young men start to look when the world doesn't soften for them. He smiled, sheepish, but familiar. Hey, he said. Sorry. I know it's late. It took me a second to place the shape of him. But then it clicked. Josh. He'd grown up with our son. Sleepovers. Soccer. Always polite, always quiet. The kind of kid who said thank you before being reminded. He'd moved away a few years ago. I hadn't seen him since. I blinked. Josh. He nodded. Yeah. I'm so sorry. My car broke down a few miles outside of town. I was driving through and figured. He trailed off. Your number's not the same. Your house was the only one I knew how to find. I stared. Not because I was uncomfortable, but because his voice, low, hoarse from evening, sounded so different from what I remembered. He smiled again, more tentative this time. Is it okay if I just crash for the night? Couch is fine. Just until I can get a tow tomorrow. I didn't even think. Of course, I said. Come in. He stepped inside. Shoes off at the door. No need to ask. Still that same respect built into his bones. He carried a backpack and a jacket that looked too thin for the season. The air off his skin smelled like old motel shampoo and road salt. I moved without thinking, pulled the blanket from the cedar chest, grabbed a spare pillow. He stood in the doorway like someone trying not to take up space. You hungry? I asked. He shook his head. No, but thank you. There was a pause. And then he said it. I'm really sorry to drop in like this. You're not, I said. And I meant it. The house felt less brittle, even with the wrong shoes in the hall, even with the silence broken. He offered to shower. Only if it's not a hassle, he added quickly. I've been driving all day. I pointed toward the guest bath and handed him a towel. While he was in there, I stood at the sink and refilled the kettle. Watched the light under the bathroom door. Tried not to think about how long it had been since someone unexpected had entered this house. How long it had been since someone had stood at my door without a delivery bag or a clipboard. He came back into the kitchen with damp hair and a clean t-shirt. "Thank you," he said again. "I feel human now." I smiled, and it didn't feel like something I had to reach for. "Tea?" He nodded. We sat at the counter. 2 mugs. No TV on. Just our voices, low and casual. We talked not deeply, not about anything important. But the conversation didn't slide across the surface. It landed, even when it was simple. He asked about the heater, the neighborhood, if the old tree by the mailbox had finally been cut down. I asked about his travels, the jobs in between, the places he liked best. It wasn't the questions that undid me. It was the way he asked them. Not to fill silence. Not to impress. Just to know. I told him about the roof. How Michael always forgets to reseal it until the first leak. How the trash only gets taken out if I leave a note. How the heater clicks 3 times before turning on, but only if I bang the side panel. He listened, with his whole body, leaning in slightly. One hand curled around the mug, the other resting loosely on the counter, thumb tracing the grain of the wood. No phone in hand. No glances away. Just present. I noticed too much. The soft edge of stubble along his jaw. The way his shoulders tensed slightly when he laughed. The way his voice stayed low, not out of secrecy, but ease. When did attention start to feel like danger? I handed him the blanket. The mug was empty now. His hair almost dry. He took the pillow and smiled. "Thanks again. Really. You didn't have to." I turned to leave the room. And that's when he said it. "Claire." Just my name. Not ma'am. Not Mrs. Halpern. Not even hey. Just Claire. I paused, my hand on the doorway. I didn't turn around, but something inside me did. I didn't go back into the kitchen. I stood in the hallway, barely breathing, long after the sound of my name had disappeared into the quiet. Claire. It had been years since anyone said it like that. Not in passing. Not clipped or casual. He said it with pause, with weight, as if the syllables themselves deserved a moment to settle between us. I went upstairs eventually. Not fast. Not slow. Just with deliberation. Each step counted, and each one felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I didn't change clothes. My shirt still smelled like soup. My jeans were too tight at the waistband leaving a soft imprint I'd usually strip off the second I got home. But I didn't. I just sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the thin light under the door. Josh was downstairs. He'd said goodnight, politely. Nothing suggestive. Nothing inappropriate. Just my name, and somehow that was worse. Because I felt it. All night, I felt it. I lay back, stared at the ceiling, listened. Not for noise, there wasn't any, but for presence. The kind you can't hear but know is there. Like the difference between alone and lonely. Like the way a house feels different when someone else is in it, even if you're on opposite sides. He was quiet. Too quiet. Which only made me more aware of every shift in my own body. Every twitch of my foot. Every flutter in my chest. I could hear my own heartbeat. Slow and uneven. I pressed my palms flat against the sheets like that might still it. It didn't. The floor creaked once. Soft. I held my breath. Waited. But no footsteps followed. No knock. No voice. Just the silence again. And the slow ache of what didn't happen. That was the shape of the night. The space between 2 rooms. And all the words we didn't say. I thought about what it would take. To go back downstairs. To say something simple. Do you want another blanket? Or, are you okay? The kind of excuse that builds a bridge without admitting that it's a bridge. I didn't move, but I thought about it more than once. And the thought wasn't fleeting. It lingered, settled into my skin, curled around my ribs. At some point, I closed my eyes. But I didn't sleep. I rested in that narrow place between yes and no, between staying in bed and taking one more step, between the woman I've always been and the version of her I haven't met yet. In the morning, light slid across the floor like water. I sat up slowly. The house was too still again. I listened for the usual things: the heater's click, the hum of the fridge, the distant sound of the TV Michael always left on. But there was nothing. Only the thud of my own heart. When I went downstairs, the couch was empty. Blanket folded neatly. Pillow returned to the cedar chest. The mug from last night, washed and drying on the rack. He was gone. Just gone. No sound. No door closing. No car starting. Only a note on the counter. Folded once. In plain black ink. Thanks for the couch. You look tired. I hope you got some rest. No name. No hint. Just those words. Simple. Careful. True. I stood there holding it. Not trembling. Not smiling. Just feeling. Feeling more than I had in months. Years, maybe. I didn't regret anything, because nothing had happened. But something had moved, and now it couldn't be moved back. I made coffee. Black. No cinnamon. I sat at the table and drank it slowly, holding the cup with both hands like it might burn. I thought about the night. The silence. The light under the door. And how I'd never known a choice could be so loud. He slept on the couch. And I slept on the edge of a choice. One step away from something irreversible. And one step deeper into myself. I didn't tell anyone. Not Michael. Not my sister. Not my friend who always says you'd feel better if you took a weekend away. There was nothing to tell, not really. Nothing that could be reported or confessed or understood out of context. Because what happened wasn't about events. It was about presence. But inside me, something had shifted. And once something shifts like that, it can't be unshifted. It doesn't scream. It doesn't shake the walls. It just stays. Like a new silence that follows you around. Michael came back Sunday evening, just as he said he would. He texted from the gate, and again when he got in the car, and then one more time as he turned into our neighborhood. Home in 5. We don't use punctuation anymore. Not even emojis. The kind of comfort you earn after years of harmless fatigue. When he stepped through the door, I heard the zipper of his suitcase brushing the wood trim. He kissed my cheek in the way that people do when they've made a life out of safe routines. No pressure. No warmth. Not unpleasant. Just placed. How is she? I asked. He exhaled as he set his bag down. She's tired. The girls are a mess. I think she wanted someone to fix her whole life. I smiled like that made sense. Because it did. Because that's what people do with each other. Assume stability. Borrow comfort. Keep moving. He talked while unpacking about the rental car, about the heat, about how he thinks he might have left his charger in the hotel. I stood at the sink, rinsing a plate I'd already washed. I knew where the charger was. I'd found it in the guest room. I didn't tell him. He didn't ask how the weekend was. He didn't ask if the house had been quiet. He didn't ask if I'd had any company. He trusted the shape of me. He trusted the structure of our life. I was the woman who washed the mugs, the woman who made the appointments, the woman who left the porch light on. Why would that change? That night I lay next to him and stared at the ceiling. He fell asleep within minutes, his breath slowing into the pattern I'd memorized years ago. It used to be comforting. Now it was just there. Steady. Expected. Predictable. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Because I'd spent a night listening to a different kind of silence. The kind that wraps around you like the edge of a question. And I hadn't answered it. But I hadn't turned away either. I thought about the stairs, the hallway, the light under the door. I thought about how small the house had felt that night. Not confining. Close. Like the distance between two people could be measured in choices not made. I started doing things differently. Not dramatic things. Not visible ones. I wore earrings again. The small silver ones I used to favor. I clipped my nails more carefully. I stood longer at the windows. Not because I expected to see him again, but because I remembered what it felt like to be seen. I began to remember other things too. The way my skin tingled after a long bath, not from heat, but from air. The way I used to hum while folding laundry. The way my name had sounded when it left someone's mouth like it mattered. Claire. I could still hear it. Soft, unapologetic. Not an invitation. Just a moment that stayed. Michael didn't notice any of it. Not the earrings. Not the way I stood by the counter longer than usual. Not the fact that I stopped setting his shoes by the mat. He still kissed my cheek in the morning. Still left his coffee mug near the sink with a ring of cream around the edge. Still asked if I needed anything from the store, then forgot to pick it up. We functioned. We coordinated. We kept the rhythm. But something in me had slipped just outside the beat. One afternoon, I stood in the living room and looked at the couch. Not dramatically. Not long. Just long enough to feel the shape of memory there. The way he had rested. How gently he had folded the blanket. How quietly he had disappeared. It hadn't been anything, but it had been everything. Not the action. The absence of it. Not what was said. But how it wasn't needed. He didn't press. He didn't reach. He just said my name. And I had felt something under my skin crack open like morning light behind a closed curtain. I hadn't stepped into it, but I had let it touch me, and I hadn't been the same since. I didn't want to be reckless. I didn't want to break anything, but I also didn't want to go back to being invisible. And the longer I let myself remember, the name, the quiet, the restraint, the more I felt like I was slowly coming back to life. That was the real distance between rooms. Not the hallway, not the stairs, but the space between who I had been before that night and who I was now. And somewhere between the couch and the bedroom door, I had begun to find the shape of someone new. Someone still quiet, still careful, but awake. I woke before the light, not to an alarm, not to movement. Just that instinctive sense that morning was coming, that the air had shifted. The house was hushed. Not sleeping, not waiting. Just holding. I pulled the robe tighter around myself, my bare feet making soft sounds on the floorboards as I moved. There was no urgency, only the pull of something quiet and unfinished. The living room came into view slowly. The couch, empty. The pillow neatly placed. The blanket folded precisely the way I would have done it, with a kind of reverence that has nothing to do with fabric and everything to do with being careful with someone else's space. The mug, his mug, was washed and drying on the rack. I stood there for a long time. The absence was not jarring. It wasn't painful. It was intentional. And that made all the difference. The note was still on the counter. Folded once. Ink dark and direct. Thanks for the couch. You look tired. I hope you got some rest. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper. Not rereading. Just tracing. The restraint in it. The grace. The fact that there was no hint, no suggestion, no flirtation. Only that simple, devastating line. You looked tired. And I had been. Not just from the day, or the dinner, or the boxes of emotional weight I carry in my own head, but from years of being the one who didn't ask, didn't stop, didn't name the emptiness. He saw it, named it, then let it be. Michael came downstairs at his usual time. The light had shifted by then, gold over the counter, soft against the table. He kissed the top of my head, reaching for the cereal. We talked about the day. the errands, the forecast. He didn't notice the note, didn't ask about the blanket or the couch. He assumed, as he always had, that I had simply been here, doing what I do, keeping the rhythm. And I had, but I was not who I had been 3 days ago. I cleaned slowly that day, not to tidy, not to erase, just to move. To be in the house the way it was now, altered by something no one else could see. I stood for too long at the sink. Let the water run over a plate that was already clean. I moved the mug from the rack, dried it gently, put it back in the cupboard, but not in the back, not out of reach. I placed it at the front, the first thing I'd see. I thought about the couch, how he'd fit himself there, long legs bent, shoulders tucked, how he had folded the blanket like a ritual. I thought about the way he said my name, not as a question, not as a boundary, but as a recognition. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't tried to, but he had made space for something. And I had stepped into that space. If only with my breath, with my memory. And now it would never be empty again. Later, I put the note inside a book. A novel I'd never finished, its spine soft with years. Not hidden, not buried, just placed, tucked in. A marker not of what happened, but of what didn't. And how loud that silence had become. In the weeks that followed, nothing changed. And everything did. I still made the bed, still bought groceries on Thursdays, still checked the mail and folded the laundry and filled the calendar. But I moved through it all differently. Less as a placeholder, more as a pulse. I started humming again while I folded. I stood at the window longer, even when there was nothing to see. I looked at my reflection without turning away. I had not become someone else. I had not undone my life, but I had found the door, and I had stood at the edge of it. He slept on my couch, and I slept on the edge of a choice I didn't make, but one that made me, one that reminded me. That restraint can hold more truth than action. That clarity doesn't always come with consequence. That something can matter deeply even if it never becomes real in the world's eyes. And that sometimes the loudest change is the one you carry in silence. Now, in the quiet of this house, I still remember the way it felt to hear my name from someone who meant it. Claire. Not possession. Not curiosity. Just presence. And I hold that in my body now. Not with longing, but with reverence. Because I stood at the threshold of something. And though I didn't step forward, I turned toward it. And I'm still walking.